Good morning. My name is Markus Scholz. I'm a professor for business ethics at the University of Applied Science in Vienna, and I have a very prestigious guest today. My guest is Professor George Enderle, who is a professor for international business ethics at the University of Notre for almost 30 years. I know George Enderle since 10 years, and we met yesterday on our flight to Bilbao, where we're both attending ISBEE or ISBEE, as the professional says. George is one of the founding fathers of EBEN, the European Business Ethics Network, and I have a few questions for him in that context. The idea is that we learn more about the EBEN pioneers in order to understand their motivation and also their current perspective on business ethics. So George, thank you for being with me today. And I guess the first question I have for you is business ethics. Why would you do that? Isn't that an oxymoron in the first place? I mean, that is what people ask me when I am on the flight, and my neighbor asked me what I would do.
Well, is it an oxymoron was the question 50 years ago also. And we can hear that question all the time, even today. And my answer is, even if they contradict each other, ethics and business, the more we have a responsibility to make sure that they come together. And so that's what we have tried to do with the business ethics movement, with the European business ethics movement, with the International Society of Business Economics and Ethics, and with many other people. I would like to, you said I was almost 30 years in the United States. That's true. I came back only for a visit to Europe. But for me, when I was asked to build up a research center of business ethics at the University of St. Gallen in 1982, which means 40 years ago, I said, I want to know what's going on in the United States. And I did a trip for 3 months, visited about 70 institutes and professors, and so I learned something what the Americans do. But in Europe, we thought we have to develop our own perspective. And so maybe I can say just in a few words what in an early making of the European Business Ethics Network. It started with a letter of Professor Henk van Looik from the Netherlands in summer 1985. I got that letter and he said, he is looking for people working business ethics in Europe. Could you come to Brussels? And so I went to Brussels and I met him, and we thought we have to find out who is active already in business ethics in Europe. We organized the first meeting in 1 year later in '86. Horst Steinmann from Germany joined us. We were with Brian Harvey from the UK, with Mario Unna from Italy, with a professor from Paris. So it was already pretty European. And then we decided to have a conference, a European conference every year in 1987, first in Brussels, then 88-89 with ESA in Barcelona, in 1990 with Bocconi in Milan, and then with the King's College in London, 1991, and 1992 in Paris. And then that fall, I disappeared from Europe. That means I went to the United States.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, the first EBEN meeting was in 1987 already, and you were already involved in organizing that meeting for EBEN.
Yes.
And that was the birth hour of EBEN in general?
Yes, we found it, that was, I think, in September or October 1987. And actually the proceedings of that conference, first EBEN conference, were published in the Journal of Business Ethics.
Oh, very good.
And I had a look at this, it's quite interesting.
And what was the reason behind that? I mean, you mentioned you were on a fact-finding mission in the United States to have a look what the people in North America, maybe not only in the United States, but in North America do. And then you returned to Europe, and then you and a group of others decided to build up EBEN. So what was the idea of EBEN in the first place? What was the vision of EBEN when you founded it in 1987?
Well, I think there were two things. One was we want to learn from Americans, and we want to develop our own perspective, both. And to learn from Americans was really that business ethics involves 3 levels of analysis. It's about individuals making decisions in business and economic life, but it's of course also the economic system. But in between, at the meso level, it's about the responsibility of business organizations. And that's what we learned, and I learned from the US, that focus on the power and responsibility of big corporations has to be addressed. And Henk van Looy, who was our president or chairman of the European Business Ethics Network, he was in very close contact with an advisor of Jacques Delors in Paris, not in Paris, sorry, in Brussels, the president of the European Commission. And so we thought that what does it mean for business in Europe to develop business ethics in a European way?
Okay, so for me, I guess, like being at least 2 generations after you, just starting up as a full professor now, or I've started a couple of years, but so for me, the idea of business ethics having 3 levels or dimension: the individual dimension, the meso dimension, the organizational dimension, and then the macro, the economic dimension. That seems to be pretty normal. But you are saying back in the late 80s, that wasn't established in Europe or anywhere else outside the United States, that corporations actually have a responsibility, and that is something you've learned in the United States, and you try to establish this idea in Europe as well.
Yes, and so that's why we thought that in order to find out what are the problems and how to address that from an ethical point of view, we have to build bridges between business and academia. So we are professors or scholars in business ethics, but we have to talk and to search with business practitioners what should we do to address those challenges, ethical challenges in Europe in the mid-1980s. That was before the fall of the wall of Berlin, and so there were many things, and we learned from that advisor of Jacques Delors that also the European committee at that time, a community at that time, was facing very important ethical issues: how to integrate, how to solve the problem of a common agricultural policy, for instance, so that the farmers should be respected but the problem should be addressed, or what to do about the so-called new members like Portugal and Spain, which joined the European community, I think in '86, so that we have, it was the cohesion fund, the social cohesion fund, that rich countries of Europe should help poorer countries to come to a level.
Okay, that is very interesting. Is that, I mean, you were saying that you were also founding EBEN in order to build a particular European perspective. And what I understand, the European perspective is that you have to take into consideration economics and institutions, for that matter, much more than our American colleagues did in the late 80s, early 90s. Is that what you brought to the table, namely the economic perspective and the institutional perspective?
Well, in St. Gallen, where I was in the 1980s, we actually organized a research symposium with the huge Professional Association of Economists in German-speaking countries, Verein für Sozialpolitik. And at that time, we focused on economics and ethics. We published 2 volumes. And, but we also invited professors of management and for philosophy, theology, to come to the table and to find out what does that mean for companies and what does that mean for the economic system. And so I remember, you know, the interest on systemic issues in Europe was much stronger, as you said, than in the United States. And that was understandable for historical reasons, because Germany was divided into different political systems and economic systems, the capitalism or social market economy, In German, we don't say capitalism. That's a bad word. We say social market economy with Erhard and others. And then the planned socialist economy in East Germany and in the Eastern countries, European countries. And so we thought that, and my background, personal background, I did a PhD in economics about the personal distribution of income and wealth in Switzerland, and how the Great Depression affected inequality, economic inequality. That was published that in 1982, when nobody talked about inequality, and also on poverty in Switzerland. So we were conscious that, but we wanted to focus on corporations as an important additional aspect which I think Europeans had to learn from Americans.
I understand. And vice versa, you were thinking about the systematic context, or the system that is behind that institutional context,
yes.
The economics, and that of course maybe the moral responsibility of a corporation is dependent or has to be understood against the backdrop of an institutional context. Very good. We are here in this EBEN Pioneer series. We also want to understand what brought our pioneers into the field in the first place. And that's a little bit personal, but I would hope that we will get a few answers from you. So what is your personal motivation, George? What brought you into business ethics? That at that time it was an exotic field. It still is a little bit of an exotic field, but what brought you into that?
Well, you know, I grew up in the 1950s at the high school or gymnasium, and at that time we talked about how the Second World War was possible and never war again, you know. And so we were very focused, also in Switzerland, we had a very good professor of history, focused on what's going on in Europe. And so, but then two American students of mine, when I studied in France, in Lyon, said, we want to go to India by car. And so we bought a deux chevaux and went from France through the Middle East.
Deux chevaux, that's a very small car, right?
This is a 2 horsepower car, right. Citroën, and we put 2 mattresses in the back, and so we could sleep at night, or somebody was driving, the other 2 were sleeping. And so we went to India, around India and back. And for me, that was a revelation of the world outside Europe, you know, completely new. And so I thought, I mean, these are millions of people, and we watched them, and I could meet some development projects in India, and I thought, well, philosophy and theology is good and right, but I need to study economics. And so I was interested in poverty for many years. And I did a PhD in economics, and then the habil at St. Gallen on poverty in Switzerland. Many people said, also the Society of Swiss Entrepreneurs said, how can you study something which does not exist? And I said, well, I have numbers, you know. And here it is, you know. And so I was interested in macro issues, but I learned from Americans that and Richard D. George, for instance, the founder of, one of the pioneers in America of business ethics, he was interested in Marxism, and he knew that the ethics of capitalism was an important question. So we found a common ground.
And help us to understand, maybe briefly, so after having studied philosophy, theology, and then economics, doing a PhD, and then habilitation, which is a second PhD to some degree. What then? I mean, did you land your first position at the university immediately? Would they be, would they like business ethics? Would the people think at that time that is actually a thing, like a subject that should be taught or researched at university level? Or have you been, seen as somebody very exotic doing something that is maybe not existed in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I had the support of the president of the university, and he was about to establish a chair of business ethics some years later. So I was preparing that. And in that time, I had good connections to business people. I could attend search committee, so to speak, of a society, or it was association of free enterprises in Zurich every 6 weeks, and learned what kind of problems they deal with, you know, environmental issues, human resource issues, also responsibility, sustainability, and so on. So that was one thing. And then when I published my report on business ethics in the United States, I was invited by Ciba-Geigy and by BMW in Munich, and to talk about what are the Americans doing, you know. And so I learned quite a lot from them, and they were seriously interested, and so I could involve those people in EBEN to support us. Ciba-Geigy, the president at that time, was very open-minded and generous, and supported the European business ethics with 30,000 Swiss francs, you know, that we have some starting. But that was a direct connection with business companies.
I understand. Maybe you allow me, it's not a personal question because I guess it's known. You teach at Notre Dame for almost 30 years, and I also understand that you studied theology and that you're a Catholic. So your spirituality and maybe even your religious conviction, had that something to you for embarking on that journey to do business ethics?
Well, yes, I would say so, but in an indirect way. You know, I said when I went to India, I was overwhelmed by the poverty issues. And so from a theological point of view, I was very interested in the theology of liberation by Gutierrez, Gustavo Gutierrez in Lima, Peru. But I also met already first in literature and then in person Amartya Sen from India, the famous economist and philosopher. And so both sources helped me to understand that this is a very important issue and motivated me. And then I found out many years after we started the European Business Ethics Network that actually in those years, 1985, 6, 7, there were a number. I was a former Jesuit, Henk van Looy was a former Jesuit. We had 2 Jesuits, one from Paris, one from London, and then Horst Steinmann, a layperson, a Protestant, and from Spain also. And we thought, how is it possible that this very diverse group with background and ages, I was quite young, Henk van Looy was already older, and Horst Steinmann, how is it possible that we can work together without many debates? And I think, in a way, it was a kind of spirituality. I referred to that Ignatian spirituality, you know, Ignatius, who is here in, of course, famous in Spain and in the Basque country, that to find God in all things. But we don't talk about spirituality. But it was an important motivation, one of many, but an important one. And so with hindsight, after 10 or 15 years, I realized that was an important motivation I call this implicit spirituality, because we did not talk about it as Americans like to do, but it was a motivating force.
That is very interesting, and I think that asks for more research on that topic. I'm not a believer myself, and I think you were a group of very well-meaning, good people, and maybe that was chance, but that is my interpretation of that topic. But either way, I mean, you formed EBEN, and you also you were one of the first person who taught business ethics at European universities, and then you went to the US. Now you're at Notre Dame, which is a prestigious, very prestigious university, and I understand that you have a number of great people there. But help me to understand, is business ethics still a niche topic at your university, or is that something that is established already, that where every MBA student has to take a course, are there individual courses? Please help me to understand that.
Yeah, well, in the US, at my university, University of Notre Dame, it is pretty well established and recognized. That is pretty clear. And I had the support of the deacon or the decan at the business school very strongly, and so in many other universities as well. But there is still a fight, you know, and I mean, we have courses, mandatory courses for students, undergraduate students and MBA students, and it's a very good program. But we wanted to, or our dean wanted to establish a business ethics department. And so he did everything, including the finances for 5 positions, research positions. Everything was accepted. And then some philosophers at our university, or one, just was able to kill that project, and we couldn't do that. And I thought that remembered me the situation in Europe and in St. Gallen, where we have to fight to institutionalize business ethics still. It's not over.
That is interesting. So why are other subjects, philosophy, for example, or sometimes economics, why would they fight business ethics? What is their motivation?
Well, different, interesting things. Well, one is saying that philosophers here thought ethics is a philosophical topic and has to be taught by philosophers. And if people in the business school teach about, they have no idea about ethics. That's one thing. And then another thing is that we, at the business school, we got more and more students interested in business and management, and including business ethics. And so in arts and letters, the interest in those courses decreased, and in our college increased.
Interesting.
And so that was a kind of competition.
Okay, that is some kind of explanation. But in general, thinking about 30 years or almost 40 years ago, to think about in the way we institutionalized, or you have institutionalized the field together with others. Have you made progress over the years, or is business ethics still a niche project done by a number of well-meaning people? But you know, real business school professors, real economists, real philosophers, they don't care, and we're basically a group of people who are, you know, doing what we do because we cannot make it into philosophy or cannot make it into economics.
Yeah. Well, I think in the United States, well, not only the United States, but I talk now about the United States because for 30 years I was more in the US and in China than in Europe. And I think it's fair to say that business ethics is institutionalized to a nice degree. Should be more, yes. But I mean, the Society for Business Ethics, the journals, etc., they are well established, and they are outstanding people. There's no doubt. And I think that's the case in Europe also, and in other countries. So
we have to come to an end already, or slowly at least, which I regret because I like the conversation with you. What do you think are the most pressing issues in business ethics at the moment? Even if we talk about concepts, I mean, there are concepts about like corporate social responsibility, CSR in short, and then corporate citizenship. We have this debate on business and human rights. For you personally, what do you think are the most pressing issues, and where do you see the future of business ethics in Europe and beyond?
Well, in a short sentence, I think human rights and business in all aspects has become extremely important. And I have been teaching human rights and business now also for a number of years, and there is an institute in London for business, human rights and business, which publishes every year top 10 issues of business and human rights from 2022, 2021, 2020, and it includes climate change, it includes global supply chains and so on, and it is very consistent with what I have developed as corporate responsibility for wealth creation and human rights. So wealth creation, not just to make money or to expand economic capital, but with those 4 types of capital: natural capital, that the nature plays an important role to create and not to destroy nature, you know. Human capital, which means educated people and healthy people. Social capital means trust relationships between actors. And then the distinction between public and private wealth, which is extremely important. So I think here we have lots of research perspectives. And a group of friends of mine here in Bilbao now at the ISBEE Congress will meet to develop a global survey of business ethics. Friends of mine, we did that 11 years ago with Dion Rousseau in South Africa, and we want to do that again and to find out what are we doing in different countries. There are 18 business ethics network here in Europe. I was surprised, you know, we had a small group 40 years ago or 35 years ago. And so, but include really the global south, from Africa, from Asia, from South America, and so on. And so I'm very optimistic that we can work together, and Zoom helps us to keep in touch and to work together. Thank you very much, Markus. It's very interesting, and I'm happy to be here. And I wish you a wonderful congress here, and I hope to see you in person soon.
Professor George Enderle, one of the founding fathers of EBEN and ISBEE, ISBEE in general. Thank you very much, George.
You're most welcome. Thank you.